Hello. Oh, we're back. It's November. We're back for another Sharing Shakespeare session. My name is Jamie Wilkes. I'm one of the Wet Mariners, and this is the Shakespeare Links Sharing Shakespeare. Don't. Oh, I'm hearing a reverb. I always do this every time. I just hear myself on the. Excuse me, technical difficulties. I'm just muting the thing. I thought that was James Corrigan speaking. Oh God, it's now. I'm just trapped in an endless cycle of hearing myself. Where am I? I'm so glad you're watching this. Anyway, I've muted myself now. That was great entertainment. Anyway, it's November. This is another session of Sharing Shakespeare. And today we are joined by James Corrigan, who is another Wet Mariner. It's a free session, but please do donate if you enjoy this session by going to shakespearelink.org.uk/donate. I believe that's the website. Just go on the website and just give us your money. We'd be very appreciative of that. This is our first session of this November term. And so James Corrigan, who is James Corrigan, you might be asking. So James Corrigan is a Wet Mariner along with me. He has also been at the Royal Shakespeare Company, where he performed in his Shakespearean roles. He performed Lorenzo in The Merchant of Venice, Rodrigo in Othello. In Two Noble Kinsmen, he played Palamon, the less attractive of the kinsmen in that production. He also played Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. He played Agrippa in Antony and Cleopatra, Ophidius in Coriolanus. And then in the West End, he played, Edmund? One of those two. But from the Willow, he played the princess in Love's Labour's Lost and Wackenetta. He played Curtis and Bianca in The Taming of the Shrew. He played Mark Antony in Julius Caesar. He played the nurse, Paris and Montague, and Romeo and Juliet. And he played both Dromios in this year's Comedy of Errors. So he's done quite a bit of Shakespeare. Today, we're just going to have a chat with him about all things Shakespeare. And you will be able to ask questions in the comments section of the YouTube if you would like to ask any questions as we have this conversation. But without further ado, please at home just shout or whatever and clap to welcome James Corrigan.
So I turn it on now?
Yeah, you can turn it on. Here he is.
Season 2, we don't see the guest until
it's
I wasn't here.
A bit of drama to introduce you. This is James Corrigan, everyone. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I was telling you earlier, our boiler broke today. Apparently, we've been inhaling in carbon monoxide for a while, so who knows what I might come out with.
Great, this is going to be a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it. Lovely. So we're going to be chatting about Shakespeare. You heard of him?
Yeah, very excited.
Great.
We've been able to do it. Actually, it wasn't that long ago that we did comedy, but it feels like a very long time since doing theatre, really.
Yeah, we both accidentally gone for a very kind of willow sort of aesthetic, although none of these plants are willows. But anyway, okay, let's go into chatting about Shakespeare and start with an easy one. Considering this week's current affairs, let's talk about a political part that you may have played. Mark Antony. You played it both at a very, very important theatre called the Willow Globe, and you also did it at this fringy venue called the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. What was it like to play Mark Antony twice?
Well, it was very, very different, because the first time, obviously, I mean, it's so different anyway with the Mariners. For anyone who doesn't know, it's sort of like one of the loveliest companies to be part of and the most inviting of audiences. And you're quite immediate. I mean, there's just obvious differences in that. It was outside. We rehearsed it in 5 days. The audience are right there, which seems a world away in COVID times. But also, kind of crucially, I suppose, it was just before the referendum really started to pick up steam, because this is the early 2016. And then the next time I did it, we were very much in the middle of Trump's America. And I just think that hearing politicians speak in such like totally different times had a very different effect on what the audience picked out. You know, these are living, breathing plays, etc., and context changes everything. And but particularly with Mark Antony, who I think in certain political eras, people really align with him and really trust him and all that stuff. But there was something incredibly cynical about the politics of the time when we did it at the RSC, and I quite heavily leaned into that and did a lot of obviously doing the part. Well, one other big thing is that we rehearsed for 5 days, whereas at the RSC you rehearse for 3 months. So you do a lot more sort of like reading, I guess. And one big thing was like sort of studying oratory, which is a really cool thing to have the time to do. And I brought in awesome speakers and all that stuff. But one part of that was that I in particular just watched a lot of Donald Trump speaking, a lot of Obama speaking, a lot of famous speeches from the past, just to sort of work out like how oratory has changed over the years in a way that you can speak to the sort of the common person now, right? This is a really long answer to your question.
I know. I mean, it was a really unfair first question. I was going to ask you what was your first Shakespeare play you saw, but instead we're gone. How does Mark Antony relate to modern politics? But
one thing, I don't know whether it's useful or not, or interesting, is that back in 1599, pretty well everyone would have been very aware of oratory and the sort of rules of oratory. And there was a book floating around, which I forget the name of, but it's the kind of thing that sort of everybody read, whether you were super educated or not. It was, you were taught.
The Art of Rhetoric by Thomas Wilson.
Yes, exactly. So Shakespeare knew that inside out. He knew that his audiences knew that inside out. And we don't really know that now, but that was just a kind of a privilege to get to learn all that stuff and just see how people over the years have used those skills to persuade the masses. And then I just tried to update it to sort of the times we were in.
Mm. So I guess, so what's it like then to do? So Shakespeare's got this toolbox of oratory that he can use for his political characters. But we're living in an age of Trump and Boris Johnson, who are using a very different set of tools, but some of them are kind of this crossover. How do you make Shakespeare's language, the words and form that he chose, how do you make that sound so it rings for a modern audience?
Okay, well, one really great thing about Caesar in particular is I think it's super accessible. I think the language in it is just amazing, and you would get so many people. This happened at the Willow and at the RSC. You'd have people often sort of in their 50s or 60s would come up and go, we were told to read that at school, but I was just too young. And just listening to it for the first time, as it's nothing to do with the way people were doing it necessarily. It was just, oh my God, those speeches in particular are incredible. They're just so well written, an obvious point. One really interesting thing about those speeches, and this will come back to relate to Trump, Obama, etc., is the one thing you were taught at school, the main thing, forgive me if everyone already knows this, is the 3 pillars of rhetoric, which is logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos meaning the logic of the argument. So quite literally, if X, then Y, persuading someone through logic, right? Which is something, say, Brutus does relatively well. Then you have pathos, which obviously just from GCSE English, we just think of sort of something emotional, but usually sad. It doesn't have to be sad. It just means literally the emotion that you use in order to persuade someone. And then really crucially, and ethos, famously, Mark Antony's very good at. Pathos, Mark Antony's very good at. And ethos is something I don't think gets a lot of weight placed on it, but it's probably the most important thing, which is literally the relationship between the speaker and the audience, whoever that audience is. So, you have Brutus coming out and saying, I'm famously an honorable man. I know I'm covered in blood right now, but hear me out. I've always been known as being trustworthy. I've been in the Senate since anyone can remember. Famously nice person. So that's his ethos. But there's something quite removed. I've always been up here and clever and bright and trustworthy, whatever. Mark Antony comes out and really he's been living in the upper echelons of society as well, just sort of in a more militaristic area, but comes out and essentially says, I'm the common man. I'm just like you. I'm not here to speak on Caesar's behalf and say that he was right or wrong or anything like that. I don't want to be here for that. I just want to come out and say that he's my friend and I want to speak at his funeral. And so then immediately you go, okay, I'll listen to this guy or whatever. Like, he's speaking to me like a human being. Side point, as you know, Brutus's speech, which is brilliant and logos heavy, is all in prose. Mark Antony's speech, all in verse. Now, there's loads of different ways of interpreting that, but sort of a bastardized simplification is that speaking in verse is usually sort of like speaking from the heart, hence the dum-de-dum-de-dum. And whereas there's something not necessarily evil, but a little more calculated about prose, or you have your clowns or whatever. But there's something a little more calculated about Brutus's speech, as brilliant as it is. Whereas Mark Antony comes out and speaks from the heart, speaks as the common man. He literally gets off the pulpit, is wearing slightly different clothes, and he wants to speak eye to eye with these people. The reason I say all of this stuff is because, Trump, for instance, is someone who has been living at the upper echelons of society his entire life, in terms of sort of just wealth and access and all that stuff, but somehow managed to convey to now like 70 million people that he's one of them, speaking for them, etc., not part of the establishment, which has been a real thing over the last 5 years. That was a real moment for me, sort of figuring that out. Well, it didn't take much figuring out. It was pretty painful to see, but like as before the Willow, and then in 2017 when playing Mark Antony, and I sort of went down a very cynical route with Mark Antony as opposed to like a real pathos route at the Willow. Partly, I guess, driven by like my cynicism at the time, but also just it didn't matter how much work I did for 3 months of previews. I went out there and I said, I mean, it's a famous speech, but also I went out there and said, but Brutus is an honorable man. And immediately you'd have people laughing. And I was suddenly like, yeah, look, they're a literate audience, fine. But also they're seeing right through it. Now, maybe that's just because I was terrible at it, who knows? But I also just think that, we've been so heavily politicized, and suddenly leaning into that was really fun. Not with like a wink to the audience or anything like that, hopefully not. But, and then it led to the point where I sort of, there's obviously famously Mark Antony's only prop as he comes, other than Caesar's dead body, to really pull on the old heartstrings, but was also Caesar's will, which he's somehow run back to Caesar's place, gone into the safe, brought the will out, and reads it out to the people and say, these are all the things that Caesar's left for you. This is how much he loved you. And I think I did it very just like honestly and sincerely at the Willow. And then it just by reading more and just realizing that there's, I don't see how he's managed to go home and come back in that time and not wash all the blood off or whatever. I was suddenly like, I think that this is a real political moment and a a deliberately political prop that is kind of fake, like that fake healthcare plan that Trump brought into the 60 Minutes interview, which is an empty book. I showed the audience right at the end, once all of the mob had run off in hysterics, that it was a blank will, which is like, I guess, a moment that people either liked or really didn't. But it just felt very much like responding to the moment in a way that I wouldn't do now. But it was quite enjoyable. Was that a 15-minute answer to your first?
No, it's brilliant. Okay. So you mentioned a bit about kind of like, you obviously do a lot of thought and stuff and reading before you start a role, and that kind of influence, different readings influenced different portrayals. What is your process? So when do you? So you get a part, you get a Shakespeare role. Where do you start?
Well, it's normally, because you and I are nerds, normally we know the play relatively well through some means. If it's Dream, we've seen it 20 times. If it's Pericles, maybe once. But like we often sort of have an idea of it. And what I like to do is both immerse myself in it and then sort of reject it as much as possible. So like, I guess it depends on the thing, but like, I think there is often a virtue to watching loads of different versions of Romeo and Juliet when you're going to play Romeo. And then I think equally, depending on how daunting it is, maybe it's best not to watch Olivier's Richard III so you don't get that stuck in your head. Anyway, so I don't know. I guess it's kind of hard to answer. I both do a lot of work and then immediately reject it and think, why did I do all that work? One of the main things when it comes to Shakespeare, which we don't have that same luxury at the Willow, I guess, but is, well, if I'm given a speech, especially one that I don't know, what I'll do is, I think this is a practice maybe I picked up from you a few years ago, is I sight read it. I'll either set up a camera or I'll get a friend or something, and I'll record just like picking up for the first time and acting it out immediately. And all you have to rely on is the verse, really, unless you know it really well. But let's say it's Two Noble Kinsmen the first time I picked it up, right? You just go, I sight read it. And sight reading is, I just think, the most incredible thing to do. Whether you have an audition, it's not just Shakespeare, just anything. If you, and I'd really recommend anyone, I don't know, the two people watching this now, Dad, whenever they do their next audition or next part or whatever, rather than looking through and looking for your lines or whatever, and then thinking about how you'd say a certain line, literally just pick up the page and act it with all your might. So that's why it's quite useful having like an audience member or just recording or whatever. And you'll find so much intuitive stuff in there. Find there'll be moments where you maybe trip up or you haven't quite got the sense of it. But usually the first time you read something, like what I love doing is whenever I'm doing, I don't know, like a workshop with people, is just chucking a speech in front of them and they have to go straight away. And it is always electric. Always, 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 always. They never fail. I've never once seen it fail. And you'd think it's just the most daunting thing in the world. Even just like, if you were to tell me to do it right now, I'd freak out, right? But it always works. And then usually like you talk it through, and then the second, third and fourth time they do it, it's just nowhere near as good. Not just because of the magic of the sort of like improvised nature of it, but like also they're literally thinking on the line because they have to. They have to be working through, you have to be working through the thoughts to figure out what's going on. Anyway, I think that's a really great first step. Then after that, I go on No Fear Shakespeare, or just I think everyone does that, but I translate it as well as I can into my own language. But trying to be as colloquial as possible, not colloquial, like specific to my vocabulary. I find that really useful because I think what that brings is a sort of like a natural cadence with it, which eventually is really useful, I find. And then I just do all the standard sounds unimportant, very important verse work of like, how many syllables are in this line? Is there a feminine ending? What's the other term for it? A long line, like 11, 12, 13 syllables. Why is it there? Always thinking about why Shakespeare has put a caesura in there, or why, and focusing on the line endings. And then something that you and I picked up a few years ago from Phil via Tim Carroll, I guess, which I think is just revolutionary, is the second syllable thing. Now, this is super nerdy. This is super nerdy Shakespeare stuff, right? But, you know, a lot of Shakespeare fans here and actors will know, obviously, you've got to hit the last word of each verse line, really, for the sense of it, the meaning. That's what you're driving towards. And then the second syllable, I spend loads of time on, because by and large, it'll help you at least just pick up the sense. You know, it's not like there's a full stop at the end of each line. You breathe to stop the other person talking, or like, you know, I'm still going, and you have to come in with the next syllable. I'm gonna make my point, and yet, right,
yeah.
Could
you just give it as an example of one whole Shakespeare line, just so we know just so we can work our way around that for people listening.
So, okay, let me find one. Oh, well, we talked about Anthony, so I'll tell that then. Okay, so, this is a good example. So, but Brutus, okay, so, but Brutus says he was ambitious. Brutus being the second syllable, ambitious being the last, obvious one. And Brutus is an honorable man, an obvious one. Here, the next line is where it says, he hath brought many captives home to Rome, right? What's interesting about that is leaning into the second syllable and saying, he hath brought many captives home to Rome, rather than he hath brought many captives home to Rome. He's brought home many sort of prisoners. That's interesting in itself, but it gives an idea to Mark Antony to go, well, he has done this. I know he's done all these terrible things, but he hath done that. And suddenly it's usually not a very sexy word. The second syllable, it's usually like a this or a yet or an all or a whatever, but it's such a springboard into the next line. And I'm pretty slavish with it. Of course, you often have like a trochee, is that right? Where it's the opposite. But, you know, I'd say a good 80% of the time, the second syllable is really one to pound. If you just do the second syllable and the last word, it really helps with sense more than anything else.
And for the audience members at home, what is the effect that they receive if you as the actor are able to do that, or if you as an actor lean into that? What is it from their point of view that does?
Well, like the point about verse, I was watching your interview with Tim Carroll earlier today, which is so good. there's no way of competing. But and he was talking about verse as being literally sort of like the natural way that you would speak, like being slavish to the verse or whatever. It doesn't make it sing, or that's not poetry in itself. It's literally a way in to convey the sense better than we could ever, because Shakespeare wrote it with that rhythm in mind. So really, I just go, oh, okay, this is the sense that Shakespeare's given me as an option, and 99 times out of 100, it's great. The effect, therefore, on the audience is, I think they just get it more. I think it literally sits in the mouth better, but also it doesn't. It's not overly staccato. It doesn't leave room for sort of like pausing and I don't know the usual trappings that you can have as an actor. So yeah, I think it's super useful for an audience. Simply, they won't know it's necessarily happening, but it keeps that drive underneath, and I just think it improves the sense. But also as an actor, if you don't really know what you're saying, if you just hit the final word and the second syllable, you're golden. Yeah, I remember that there was that exercise that we did at drama school where Shazia Nichols, Wet Mariner Shazia Nichols, was just given a speech which had our head of acting had taken out all of the punctuation, no full stops, no commas, no nothing. And I think it was written in like maybe even the sort of like folio font. So sometimes it's hard to tell whether an F is an F or whatever. And he just gave it to her, and she had to sight read it for us, right? And we didn't know that there was no punctuation on it. And she just went, okay, I'm just going to hit the iambic. And it was brilliant, wasn't it? I just remember going, wow, she absolutely nailed that. She must know this. This is something that I've worked on. And she was like, she showed us the page and there was no punctuation on there. And I was like, oh, that is such a light bulb moment of going, you know, the verse, the rhythm, etc. It's your friend. It is not something to overcome. It is something to really help you with the sense. You know, in the same way as having like 11 syllables in a line is, you know, in the one sense, it's sort of, you know, it's more difficult to get it out because we're used to 10. But then it's a gift because it's telling you you can lose yourself here, you know, in the same way as Shakespeare saying he hath done this. It's giving you an option, and it's probably best to like at least take it on board and really think about why you're rejecting it if you do.
Yes. We've got an audience question.
I'll try and answer it succinctly this time.
Well, no, this is quite easy. Pam Johnson's asking, did you two first meet playing Two Noble Kinsmen?
No, we didn't. No, we met. Hello, Pam. I first saw Jamie.
You don't need to make this about me.
I just remember seeing him on stage for his theatre company Belt Up just before we both ended up at Lambda, starting Lambda in 2011, and we were in the same class, and then started the Wet Mariners later in the school year. So we have obviously, I was rather intimidated by him from the beginning, and then, like, since then we've done, countless plays together. We were usually in the same play at drama school. Since then, we've obviously performed loads together in the Mariners. We wrote a play together a couple of years ago, which we Bayard, which we did, and then obviously then we got to work together at the RSC in Two Noble Kinsmen. I think it was quite a deliberate. I think it was quite a deliberate casting choice. So I'm really, really glad to be friends with Jamie because he had worked with Blanche, who I'm sure some of you.
She did a Sharing Shakespeare.
Yeah, Blanche McIntyre, the director, and she had directed you in Comedy of Errors. And there's actually not a lot of time on stage between the Two Noble Kinsmen to early on to really create like a chemistry of brotherhood or kinship, whereby it feels like there's some sort of history over years. And so I think Blanche cheated basically, just got two people who work together.
So you mentioned that you went to Lambda, you went to drama school. So I'm quite interested to just plot kind of your evolving understanding of how to do Shakespeare. So when you were at school, what were your thoughts about Shakespeare and how to do it?
I only did a couple of plays at school because I remember auditioning for Julius Caesar, not getting a part. I remember auditioning for, basically it really didn't do any plays at school. Did 2 plays at school and none of them were Shakespeare. And the only Shakespeare I had seen was Titus Andronicus done at school because we were studying Titus Andronicus and the 6th form happened to do it at the time. Sadly, although not very interestingly, although I'm sure my teacher was very good at it, I didn't really have much of an interest, and I didn't really I just didn't really connect with it at all. Despite the fact they chose Titus Andronicus because it was an all boys school and it would be bloody and gory and they could show a good film version and all that stuff. I think that they probably did a good job, really, but I just didn't really connect with it, and that wasn't really where I was going. And then when I was at uni in my first year, and this was like the greatest experience ever, and again links back to the factory or Tim Carroll, is that a few people in the year above me had gone to see Hamlet by the factory and said to them, could you, if we paid you, could we steal your concept and do Much Ado About Nothing, and like you guys, will pay for you guys to come in and like teach us how to do it. So over about 3 or 4 months in my first year, so most of the parts were swapped, but some of the sort of like bigger roles were just cast. And so like as in swapped each night normally, whereas I was cast as Benedict, and so I said as Benedict throughout. And I just got to learn Shakespeare in the most anarchic way. You know, there was just no rules and stuff other than the text, you know, which is obviously Tim Carroll's big thing. And so suddenly, you know, you're 19 doing pretty well your first ever Shakespeare. And you're taught like possibility is endless. We don't know if the next scene is even going to be in this room. We don't know where the lights are going to be. The next scene, it may be that all the men can only be in this one corner of the room and the women can be anywhere. Or this next scene, if you're speaking, you can't have both feet touching the ground. You know, whatever it is, sometimes it didn't work each game, and you know, you didn't know what props there were going to be or set or anything. It was like improvised Shakespeare, where you improvise everything except for the Shakespeare. And I just fell in love with it. And I think that's why like doing something like The Mariners was very appealing to me as well.
Before we get to The Mariners, so you went from university to drama school, and LAMDA, I guess it kind of, you say, had a classical training. So what was the evolution there from your university kind of freehand experience to then getting kind of more formal acting training with Shakespeare?
Yeah, well, immediately you get like just like a lot of sort of interesting academic stuff of like how to use the voice. We had, I thought, like great teachers at LAMDA, particularly for that stuff. Not to do it down, but like as in we learned a lot about verse, and they're all sort of the basic things, but it's so useful to be reminded of it, of like, and that exercise of like moving on a comma or like jumping on an exclamation mark or whatever, and just really just finding out all of these ways to get it into your body, because they were obsessed with the idea that we all came from university and therefore like, you know, too heady or whatever. But yeah, essentially, like you put it, sort of a formal training whereby in one class you'd have Yorgos, the Greek god, making us run around screaming the word down and getting tired until you suddenly went into Hamlet or something like that, and you're responding to your body or whatever, and usually you're tired and grounded, and then it'd be quite good, and you were speaking from a lower register. And then just all of the sort of tools that you're given of how to interpret verse. So basically what I was lucky with is I had this anarchic start where I wasn't scared of it, and then I suddenly had this like more formalized honing where it was like, oh, and like here are all these other tools that you can have. So I never felt like it wasn't for me from the moment I started being able to do it, which I think is very lucky, because I think a lot of people, it just feels so alien to, and it's just such a shame, because it should be so universal, etc. So I'm not going to say anything new there, but yeah. So I had a very lucky training with that. Inevitably, also though, you do end up being a bit of like a slave to, you must stand in neutral and you must whatever, but like it's and you must hit the line endings and have a short breath at the end, which, you know, there's a validity to. So it's quite good to go from anarchy to something relatively strict, and then try and find your balance within that. You know, I remember us, like, we would look at there's that great speech of in the prison, the Richard II prison speech that Rylance does, and that's online, and you're watching it and you're going, oh wow, yeah, he's like by and large really hitting the line endings, but he's also really playing with it. He's playing jazz with it, and you suddenly go, oh, okay, that's the next stage. Good luck reaching it, but like that's the next stage. So yeah.
So you get this formal training after kind of this anarchic introduction, and the anarchic introduction kind of went into what we do with the Mariners.
Yeah.
But then when you're out of drum school and then you're starting to get your kind of first few professional big jobs at someone so terrifying as the Royal Shakespeare Company, how do you does that approach mix with that kind of institution?
Oh, it totally depends on the director, and I was by and large just like very, very lucky with the directors, whether or not they give you any, they give you their confidence to sort of like do what you want to do and bring ideas to the table. So like when I was rehearsing for Merchant of Venice and Othello at the same time, it was. They for Shakespeare's birthday in 2015, I think every year they do like a cabaret event, I guess, where they get lots of different scenes and songs and performances or whatever. You know, you have like Harriet Walter doing some Prospero, and you have Anthony Sher inevitably doing some Lear or something like that. And I was asked to do a speech, Romeo speech, but soft, well, like 3 on the window breaks. And I'd never, other than going to see you in Wendy Peter Pan, I'd never been to Stratford, certainly never stood on that stage. And I basically got this call 3 days before, like, would you come up and do this? I was like, absolutely, that'd be amazing. You're fearless at that point, right? I get there with an hour before the show starts, and turns out everyone else has been teching for days and all that stuff. And I'm kind of freaking out because I haven't done it in front of anyone. And there's 1,100 people there. My parents have driven up for it as well. And you're taken over by the sheer size of it and the weight of like who's been there, and you're walking past the wall of signatures of like, you know, McKellen and all that stuff. And you're like, oh, David Tennant's there, and you're freaking out. Anyway, but the sort of anarchy of also just like not knowing anyone was quite useful. But I went up to the director, the young guy who's putting it together, and I was like, he was like, are you good to go? Because we don't have time to tack it or run it through. I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Can I just ask you about one line in it? Because I just don't know how to do it at all. I don't know what it means. He's like, okay, quick. I was like, yeah, sure. So, but software like 3 on the window breaks. It is the East, and Juliet is the sun. And I was like, I mean, obviously I know what that means, but I don't know how to do it. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And he was like, I don't know. I don't know, but I tell you what, it's in thrust. You'll see the audience, and we'll have the house lights up, and just say the line to a person in the audience, and you'll figure it out. I was like, okay. And then I go out there, and I sort of like dive down behind a musician, but software like 3 on the window breaks, and immediately gets sort of an accidental laugh. So I feel like, okay. And then I've got to deliver the line. And I just look at this old chap in the front row, and I just look at him and I go, it is the East. And he looks up at me, and everyone can see him because he's in the audience, and he just goes, and then they get to laugh because they're just laughing at him. And I go, and Juliet is the sun. And he goes, I still don't know what that means, but the whole audience found it very funny. And immediately I was in, and I just realized, oh shit, like this is like a duologue with the audience where they don't have any lines unless they're feeling frisky. And so just go out there and you keep that sense of anarchy, like do as much work as you can, do as much lambda as you can, and then go out there with as much Factory of Mariners as you can, and hopefully something will happen. And in that case, it did. And you just suddenly look out and you go, oh man, this is the greatest feeling ever. So that was my first time on the RSC stage. So I did feel kind of like I wasn't burned on my first moment. You know, I was several other times, but luckily they weren't the first. So I did feel sort of fearless, and one great thing about the RSC is it has sort of like this like prestige because of, you know, people come by, but no one goes to the shows. Like really, as in obviously loads of people do, but it's quite separate to the scary nature of like agents or casting directors or producers or whatever. So really, you can go there and cut your teeth, and like you can fail and fail and fail and fail and fail, and no one really cares, which is great.
And have you failed?
Oh yeah, yeah, and sadly they were immortalized forever because that's when they brought in all the filming of all the plays. So they're all there. They're all there. And given lockdown, they just keep running it on BBC Four and marquee TV and stuff like that. So you get a picture of yourself wearing some stupid jacket, delivering lines terribly. Oh, okay, hopefully.
And did you have any? Can you think of any big light bulb moments like that one you just had with Romeo, but throughout kind of like that practical experience in the professional world? Were there any big light bulb moments that stick out?
Oh yeah, loads. One of my favorites is so I've seen really a moment. It's like a person, I guess. Is the actor Lucian Msamati, who I mean he's now just. And at the time we met because I was playing Rodrigo and he was Iago, and it was the first black Iago. And it was like quite a provocative exercise, and very interesting just in and of itself. But Lucian, aside from just being an extraordinary actor anyway, and is a very generous man in the room, he's also like a clown. Like he just has this clown energy, which is obviously like perfect for Iago. Anyway, there's sort of like two stories about him, which I think are super useful, right? And play into this sort of anarchy vibe. Is his speech, and what's he then that says I play the villain? Which is obviously a brilliant moment where you've had all this carnage on stage of he's got everyone drunk, he's got Cassio drunk, he's orchestrated this fight, it's kind of blown up bigger than he expected. It's woken up Othello and Desdemona, and Othello's fired Cassio. Cassio's been crying, and Iago's, and there's blood everywhere, there's glass everywhere, and we hadn't realized stupidly in advance that we have to clean up all of this mess, but there isn't a moment to. And so Lucian had this amazing speech straight off the back of Cassio walking off stage and saying sort of like, thank you, honest Iago, after he's promised to help him out. And he goes, and what's he then that says I play the villain? And it was obviously beautiful. And then just before the dress, or just after the dress, the director goes up to Lucian and says, mate, you're going to have to clean the stage because everyone's gone off and the next scene is in a different location. And also just for a health and safety point of view, you're going to have to clean all the blood off, the liquid from the beer. You're going to have to sweep the stage. And Lucian's like, and I was stood there in the background going, how can he chuck this at this guy right this last minute? And like, he's worked for 3 months on this brilliant moment and the speech. Anyway, Lucian was like, okay. And I was like, wow, he's taken that well. And then that night, Cassio walks off, thank you, honest Iago. And then Lucian just cleaned the stage for a minute without saying anything. He just didn't say anything. And you just feel this tension rising in the audience where everyone's like, so he was just kind of muttering along and singing the song and wiping the stage and really meticulously cleaning it, almost like he was making a point to the director and like really taking his time. And then eventually sort of just looks up and the audience are like, is he going to say anything ever? And he just goes, what? And it just let out this huge roar of laughter, like I've not heard on that stage before. And he was like, what? What's he then that says I play the villain? Like, I'm not doing this for your entertainment. It was like this sort of like this very naturalistic hiatus in the show. And suddenly it was the moment of the show. And every review mentioned it for two reasons. One, it was an awesome moment. But two, they were like, it's so amazing how Iago clearly has this OCD, which really improves his character. Because also Lucian was told, because he choreographed this whole thing with smoking, that he wasn't allowed to light it up because he hadn't filed for a license. So rather than putting away the cigarettes that he'd been working with the whole time, he just would bring it out, go to light it, and then not light it. And people were like, that's genius. Anyway, very roundabout way of saying, I just watched this guy constantly like come up with amazing things, get told he couldn't do it for whatever arbitrary reason, and then make it better. And he saw me sort of dealing with a moment like that at one point where I had this business to do with money, and it was dumb, but it was like everything was pinned on this, right, for me, and it was taken away from me for a sort of stupid reason. And he could see that I was struggling with it, and he just came over to me and said, hold on tightly, let go lightly. And like, he's got this beautiful accent as well, so it sounds incredibly profound, but just essentially meaning, you know, fight for your, like, I guess your artistic rights or whatever, or what you want to do, but let go of it if you can't do it, because you will find something better. And we did. And so like, that was a real moment of going, oh, like whenever you put a limitation in someone's way, as long as they are like, aren't clouded by the frustration of it, which I can absolutely be, you will find something better. And that's what the Mariners is. The Mariners is, okay, how many limitations can we put in? You know, we've only got 4 people to do Comedy of Errors, and it's going to be in 3.5 days, and only 22 audience members, and we can't touch or whatever. And you go, and then something beautiful comes out of it because of those limitations. So that was a real light bulb moment. It's not easy to always remember, absolutely. And I've definitely held on too tightly many, many times. But he is just someone to really aspire to there, I think.
Yeah, I remember that moment as well, and it's incredible thinking how that was just a beautiful accident.
After 3.5 months of rehearsal. And that's yeah.
So you work through the RSC, and then you go to the West End to do Edmund with King Lear, or Edmund in King Lear with Sir Ian. Sir Ian. So what was it like working with Gandalf? What was that like from an actor's point of view, having such a titan in the room as your colleague? How did that affect your process?
Well, it had already been on in Chichester, and I was joining the company when it moved to the West End, because luckily the guy playing Edmund before got a TV job. So, but so there was this sort of an added thing of being like the new kid at school, and they'd all already made friends and all that stuff. And I had 6 months of unemployment before that, as in I knew 6 months before. So I just built it all up in my mind, and we only had 2 weeks rehearsal. So this is all just to say, it was all suddenly like, I'm just freaking out of going into this room, and in 2 weeks having to rehearse this, almost 4-hour show and make a mark and whatever. But then you get in there and you're just like, he's just amazing. You know, I think he's kind of got like this reputation for being quite declamatory and and I unfortunately didn't see his King Lear in 2007, I think it was. But he was just the room, the literal theatre was really small, and he insisted on taking out loads of seats and stuff like that so that no one would ever be too far away, so they didn't make any money. But it was just very intimate and very like, he was different every night. This is an 80-year-old guy who carries on Cordelia, pretty impressive, and did it differently every night. Every single time. And you would suddenly like, don't get me wrong, he dropped lines most nights, but he would drop a line, like a big line, like, about dividing, he forgot to divide the kingdom one night, right? And we're all on stage for the first scene. He just forgets to divide the kingdom. And then he looks at us all and goes, ooh, and just laughs and continues. And he suddenly goes, oh God, that can only happen. I feel like Tim Carroll said this as well. Like, you can only be okay with dropping lines if you've dropped lines loads of times and gotten through it. You know what I mean? And so he, that was just amazing to sort of like, watch him and stuff like that. This isn't a bad thing at all, but I didn't. The way that Edmund's track works is I basically didn't have any time with him. So other than walking by his dressing room and he'd be like, Like, and he was just a very lovely, generous man and all that. But it was simply because, like, I really had no literal acting time with him. It was just great to sort of go to rehearsals early or stay later and just watch him at work. And like, it was interesting because also Tim Carroll was saying that Mark Rylance, his mood really dictated the mood of the room. And I don't think that was the case with McKellen. He was just, maybe it's because he'd already done it in Chichester and he was just like totally comfortable that he had like nailed it and all that stuff. But he was very relaxed and very, he'd make a point, like a very specific point about Shakespeare or verse or whatever in a certain moment. But really, ultimately, he didn't feel like a dominant force in any negative way. Of course, if he's speaking, you're listening. But it only ever felt like a privilege, really, So yeah, it was great. My only thing, and we probably don't have time to go into it, was that I developed for the first time ever like pretty intense stage fright in the final week after 100 and something performances, where I just couldn't get through a scene without either dropping a line or thinking that I was going to drop a line, and I'd been so consistent up until that point that it really threw me. And so my only sad feeling is that when I die at the end on stage as Edmund, and as soon as I died on the final night, I was like, oh, relief. I can't wait to get off this stage. And that's the only sad thing about the experience, because I was like, you're there and you're watching, McKellen, I'd be like this, dead on stage, or looking at him doing his, final speech. And I'm just sad that I, in that moment, wasn't like, I'm going to relish this. I was like, get me the hell out of here. So that's just quite a tough thing to overcome.
Yeah.
Stage fright. Yeah.
God. We've got some audience questions that we should there's loads, they're all streaming in.
I'll be punchy.
Here's one. How did the Wet Mariners come into being, and how did you find the name?
Well, the Wet Mariners came into being because you, Jamie, had discovered the Willow Globe the year before, or maybe a couple of years before, with your theatre belt up, and our class was divided into a smaller group than the 30 of the whole year, and by and large, like, there was just a group of basically 10 of us that were really quite close, and just sort of like one lunchtime, I think, just got together in a room. We're like, should we go and spend a week in Wales doing Love's Labour's Lost with basically no rehearsal? And we were like, we all just looked at each other and thought, yeah. So it was all sort of Jamie's provocation, egged on, I think, probably by Shaz and Amy or something like that. And then suddenly we're there. I know why we're called the Wet Mariners, but I don't remember when the decision was made.
It's a mystery. It's from The Tempest, Enter Mariners Wet.
Yeah, but I don't remember that moment.
It's just a brilliant name.
It's a great name. It also didn't feel like a great name the first year, because the first year was this like gorgeous weather, almost too sunny, like too idyllic, and we had such a good time. And then since then, it's mainly been raining. Like the next year, we then suddenly had to do it in the barn, and it was like a monsoon, and we were suddenly like, oh God, why don't we call ourselves the Wet Mariners? We were just asking for it. And we obviously recently did Comedy of Errors at the Willow in very nice weather, but then like a week later at the in Milton Keynes on a stage that you described as Shakespeare on ice, because it was so wet.
God, yeah.
And even standing still, you couldn't stand still, you would move because it was so wet. Anyway,
I fell over a lot.
It also meant that we would just usually wear wellies, so it just solved a costume problem. You didn't have to breathe about it.
Yeah, when you've got 5 days to rehearse, you don't want to be thinking about footwear.
Yeah.
What next question should we do next? Let's go around that quickly whilst it's still in everyone's memory. Does stage fright just come suddenly and go the same way? Does stage fright just come suddenly and go the same way? I don't know what the scansion is of that line.
Oh, does it go as suddenly as it comes?
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
Did that.
My reading was terrible there.
No, it comes pretty quickly and it stays with you for a long time. It was interesting because like that company was so great because there were a lot of like much more experienced actors, a lot older actors and stuff, and they almost treated me like oh, I've joined the club kind of thing. Like it was quite nice because they were like, oh, I remember when I was spooked, and they all have one or two times where it's not just stage fright. It's like I didn't realize the word was spooked,
Yeah.
and one actor in the cast, he still has to go through all of his lines beforehand before each show. So yeah, I think it's the beauty of the Mariners is that there's something quite low stakes about the situation. Not that we don't aim for like perfection or whatever, but like no, we really put a lot of work into it, but the stakes are kind of freeing. And so I think I've been able to, there are certain environments in which I feel like it's all good. I don't feel stage fright at the Willow Globe,
I mean, you've since done The Nurse, which is famously hard for
given my nurse, my beard
and both Dromios.
Both Dromios, yeah. But so yeah, I don't know who asked the question, but I maybe have to get back to you on that. I don't know. Sadly, I mean, I was rehearsing a play in March, and I thought maybe now I'll overcome it. That's been taken away. So
yeah.
So we'll see. It's been rescheduled for August 2021, so we'll find out.
Here's hoping. Next question. Susie West asks, I wonder about your approach to playing women on the anarchy/nerd spectrum.
So I guess that's a really good question. Like quite early on, the first two shows, definitely gender was like a point that we were making, right? Love's Labour's Lost was all the men played the women, all the women played the men, but the men played the women as women. I mean, I think I still had a beard and all that stuff, but like, I don't know, it was kind of like the Rylance 12th Night vibes in a way. And then Taming of the Shrew was very much, the men playing women, women playing men, but as our own genders. So Tom was Kate and was sort of like this 80s Doc Martens wearing like punk, I guess, skinhead. And I guess the long answer to your question is it really depends. I'm not particularly flexible or physically very good at acting, and so I, for instance, love playing the nurse as you don't know whether she's a man or a woman. That I think was for me quite useful. And then, but the princess was like a real challenge, and I don't think I nailed it, but really trying to think that way. I don't know. Basically, I could answer it. Susie, let's talk. We could have a much longer conversation about it. But in general, I guess the answer is it all depends. And just to go back to Lucian for a second, he has always said that the Shakespeare role he's desperate to play is Juliet because he just could not be further from it. And I think I would relish that. I'd be terrified of it, but I think I would relish that kind of thing one day. So, Susie, if you organise it, I'll do it. And we'll find out.
You heard it here first. Well, that's how McKellen ended up getting a pantomime. He said on Parkinson's that he wanted to. So this is your equivalent of Parkinson's. It's talking to me and it's going to manifest. Okay, well, another question. Pam Johnson asked the question about stage fright, and she's just said, we sometimes think it's only amateurs that get nerves. So I think it's very, I mean, I know we've had long conversations about that moment, that stage fright, and it is a professional actor's nightmare. But I think it's quite important actually for everyone to hear that, yes, it is terrifying to go on stage, and we take that for granted sometimes.
Yeah. And I never thought I'd have it because I'm always like so prepared and all that stuff. It's not about that, You're just sometimes it just happens. And of course, like, this is nothing new, but it is really useful as well. I mean, stage fright is not useful down anyone, but the nerves are useful. My God, absolutely.
Yeah.
And but to give something like a more active way of dealing with it, I think the different every night thing is really useful, because you don't, because you're training yourself to always be thinking on your feet anyway. You know what I mean? You're not training yourself to hit a certain note, and then if you don't hit it, you're judging yourself, or you don't rely on hitting a certain note to then remember the next line. You see what I mean? If you learn all the thoughts, you could mitigate that. And a really useful tool is one that you taught me, Jamie, and we did pretty well every show before Two Noble Kinsmen, as a way of, particularly for a long run, it can get a little it can stagnate or plateau or whatever. And Jamie brought in this bowl and would write down on little pieces of paper like a word or a provocation, and some of them were silly, like sing a line, and some of them were like family or whatever, and we both added to the pot. And over the time, we would always pick one out, and we would sometimes tell each other, sometimes not. And like, for instance, one of mine was like mother, and I suddenly realized that, like, Palamon never ever mentions his mum, and you go, that's interesting. So then suddenly I'm trying to investigate that on the Wednesday matinee, so that it may have a slight, who knows, the audience may not notice a single thing. Maybe you opposite me didn't notice a single thing, but it's certainly keeping it alive. And rather than thinking of the shopping list that you got to do, and then thinking they hate me on stage, and then thinking what's my next line, which is when the stage fright will come in. So those, I forget, I mean, I don't know, I forget what we called them, but
points of concentration.
Points of concentration. If you take one thing from this, well, two things. One is sight reading. Two is points of concentration. I think points of concentration can really mitigate that. So you're not focusing on getting it right. You're focusing on discovering something new each time. And also, the beauty of theatre as well is that people often think, if you sing a line, that you were meant to anyway. You know? I mean, very rarely did it ever fall completely flat or anything. You know?
It's what all those Victorians were doing, though, just points of concentration. Got a question from Olivia. Any advice for drama school auditions this year? She says, obviously slightly different as it's all online now. I hope you're both well. James got me to push myself into acting, so thank you.
Oh, glorious. Well, I do a lot of work with people doing their drama school auditions. And the main thing I would say, because they get you to do a soliloquy, right? Which is something, it's so strange, drama school auditions, because it's just not like any other audition ever to come in with a prepared modern and a prepared classical and do that, maybe a song. So know that it's its own thing and that it's a real lottery of sorts, but then also try and find the fun in it. And where I think what I really love about working on soliloquies with people is, well, okay, if I'm only going to give one note, it's, who are you talking to? And the answer is never the audience, because there is no audience for you, particularly when you're doing it, because they don't want you to look at them and they're writing down and they're not there. So you sort of got to manifest an audience. And the way you do that is by picking a specific person. So, and maybe that person can change, you know, in a sort of points of concentration way. So if you're to say, I love you, to the love of your life, you'll say that differently to the way you'd say it to your mum who's running out the door, or to a kid that you're trying to mock. You know, like, there's so many different ways of saying it, and rather than trying to think of different ways of saying it, think of a different person that you're saying it to. That will give you something active to play. And usually, just as a general thought, a great way of endowing the audience is as a really close friend. And how I define that is someone who is there for you, rooting for you. So it's a safe space, because usually a soliloquy is you're trying to literally use someone as a soundboard, and think of the kind of person you'd use that for, but also someone who understands your faults. They're not necessarily going to let you get away with everything. So there's a nice balance in there. So I don't know who it is, your friend Kate or something like that, who can recognize when you're being silly or when you're whatever, so that you can react off a manifestation of your friend there. And just to keep it live, just maybe do it for your boss, or do it for your teacher at school, or do it for someone you've got a crush on. And it will change the entire dynamic of the speech, and keeping that loose is really useful. So always, 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 who specifically is your audience? And that goes for all actors whenever doing a soliloquy. You're never talking to yourself, ever, 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 ever. You're talking to someone specific, never to yourself, never to the audience, but specifically to someone in the audience that you've endowed as someone specific. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that's all our questions. I'll finish off with the last one. I was trying to construct it, but to bring it round to our logos, pathos, ethos, which one of those do you think you sit most at home with as an actor?
That's a good point. I think I find the pathos a lot sort of more difficult to access, I suppose.
Just to remind everyone what pathos is.
Oh, sorry, pathos. Logos is persuasion through logic. Pathos is persuasion through passion or emotion, and ethos is persuasion through who am I to you, our relationship. And I think I probably quite heavily rely on ethos actually a lot, with a bit of logos chucked in there. I'm not. That's something I want to work on. Is the pathos. I want to make you cry.
Well, were you having that conversation where Shah's told us about red wine actors and white wine actors? And red wine actors are passionate. It's red. It's kind of quite Latin. White wine actors are very thought. It's all very kind of it's tidy. And every time you ask an actor this, they try and tell you they're rosé.
No, sadly, I think I'm quite white. But
white wine.
But I think that there have been definitely performances where I've been red wine, and that's a funny phrase, but and they're the ones that I remember and love, and I'm proud of. There's something quite held about white wine, and something quite trying to get it right. Again, Tim Carroll was talking about trying to please the critics and all that. I've certainly been guilty of that big time. Because you're just worried about the next job and feeding yourself and all that stuff, and getting a nice review. Whereas red wine is not conducive with that. Red wine is just, I think I've probably done that maybe 3 times.
Did you have a hangover though?
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, that takes just over an hour. But thank you so much, James. Can everyone at home give James a virtual round of applause, scream, throw your knickers at the screen, or whatever you want to do in appreciation. Phil's doing that right now, I'm sure. For those of you who have enjoyed this session, please go to shakespearelink.org.uk/donate. I think that's the website. Just go to the Shakespeare Link website and donate some money if you can. That would be lovely in appreciation. We have another session next week with Nia Lynn. James, you've worked with Nia, haven't you, at the RSC? We've both worked with her at the RSC. She's absolutely fantastic. She did a Sharing Shakespeare session in the summer, and she's returning by popular demand, and she's going to be doing some practical stuff with me and my friend. So we're going to be up on our feet, and she says, bring your complete works to read along, and it's going to be a lot of fun. After that, we've got Owen Horsley the following Monday, who's a brilliant director who's worked with Cheek by Jowl and the Royal Shakespeare Company. And then the week after that, we have Dr. Will Tosh, who is one of the resident experts at the Globe Theatre who I've worked with a lot. If you when you get start rehearsals at the Globe, you get an amazing lecture by him, and he knows so much, and he's looking forward to just having a cup of tea and a chat. But do join us for that. Email info@shakespearelink.org.uk, and like you did today, you will get sent a link. But once again, please express your appreciation and amazement and wonder and love for James Corrigan.
Thank you.
It's just me clapping at you. But everyone, I'm sure everyone is clapping at you at home. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
What did you say?
Those next guests are brilliant. I'm definitely the support act. Yeah, brilliant.
No, you're not the support act.
A stage of Glastonbury that. Oh, did that happen? Okay. Oh, well,
no. Yeah, don't be so down on yourself. But thank you so much. Thank you. I'm gonna go off end stream now. But bye everyone. Goodbye. End.